Welcome back. So in the last video, which was part 4 of Unit 2, I explained to you how you can use the if else structure. We looked at if, we looked at else if with multiple conditions. Then we looked at the last structure, which was the else part. And as you can see, it's pretty simple, very similar to your Python. Again, across programming languages, what you need to say is the most important, which is the so-called semantics. The syntax does not really matter because it doesn't take much time to learn a new language, especially when the paradigm is similar. So I'm going to move on. And here is another example. So in this practice, I have many examples. I'm going to leave them to you to practice so that you can click run on your side and see it works. An example here, as you can see, you read two numbers, first number, second number. You check if the second number is greater than the first one. You set the bigger number to the second number, and you display the second number. So it's pretty straightforward. We've looked at formatting before now. We've looked at if statements before now, and you can then run this program on your side and try to test it. Should you run into any errors before this week's lab, please contact your tutors and ask them the questions, what you're doing wrong. So we move on. Here's another one. I've run a similar example to this one for you. It's very trivial. X is 3, X is 2. If X is greater than 3, is 2 greater than 3? That's no. So this is expected to be displayed. And again, you can test this. This is a very simple problem. So the else if that is nested. So this is an aspect that you've not seen. But again, we've done similar things in Python. Again, this is an if statement block. This is the else part. But the block for the else starts here. As you can see, the else block starts here and ends here. And within the else block, just the same way we had it in Python, it's possible to have a separate if statement block or if else block inside that else part. And that's what we had here because we needed to check for some other conditions. So here's a separate if, and this is the else of that if. If that if needs another else if, we're definitely going to put it in. So that's the structure. Again, here's an example of a program. It's a very trivial one. Please run it on your PC. This is double equal to. Run it on your PC and check and see how it works. So getting down to this part, if you remember in Python when we were dealing with algorithms at first, we had a structure, we call it the case structure. And this is the case structure as implemented in C#. For this one, I'm going to have to write some code and show you how it works and to show you that in fact it does work. So the idea is to use the switch statement like an if statement, all right? Like we did in Python. So you use an integer selector here. You consider each case like we did when we were dealing with algorithms in Python, way before Python. So the whole idea is, let's say you have a problem that says, write a program that reads in an integer number, 1, 2, 3, and decides if a number is 1, then it should be a color blue. If the number is 2, the color should be red, and the number is 3, the color should be green. So how do you approach such a problem? Here I have an example for you. So here's a simple program that reads in a number and displays colors, 1 for blue, 2 for red, and 3 for green. So again, enter a number. I just get a number in. Switch. Now you use a switch statement, which is like a select case or case statement. You have a number here, and now you consider every case. And this is sometimes seen as an alternative to an if statement. However, for a problem like the grade system problem, the problem we saw earlier on, let me see if I can still find the problem. For a problem like this one, it's not going to work because with the switch statement, you have to enumerate every possibility. And here there are 100 possibilities. So it's best to use if statement for that. But for things that the possibilities are quite finite, which means there are few, you may use the switch statement for that. So I consider switch if its case is 1, if number is 1, display blue. If number is 2, display red. But every time you use a case, you must use break to show that this is the end of the case. If number is 3, use green, break, then default is like your else, your if statement. So default is if all of those things are not true, what should happen? And that's it. So that is an example. Please follow the code, write it exactly the way you have it, and then attempt to run the program. It's very trivial. So I'm going to move on to loops. And before I step to loops, let me just, I have commented out the previous code that we had here. So, but let me just run this so that you can see, and then we can move on to the next thing. So it's running. I'm going to put 2, and then you can see red. So it works perfectly well. All right. But try to run it on your side and see how it works. So I'm going to move on to loops. Okay. And again, over the last week, you've seen small examples of loops. I'm going to start with while loops, exactly like while loops in Python, just that in this case, there are curly brackets around it, but the conditions are still the same. So the syntax is here on the slide for you. However, these things are best with examples. So I'm just going to delete. I'm not sure I'm going to need this code fragment anymore. So I'm just going to remove all of this, and I'll write a while loop that displays 1 to 10. All right. So before I do that, I will need an integer I, and I may want to initialize it to 1 at first. All right, equals 1. Then I can start a while loop that keeps going until I is 10. So I will say while I is less than or equal to 10. Then what do I want to do? I just want to display whatever I is. So console.writeLine I, right? And the job is done. So, however, you could see that I is always going to be 1. There's no way I increments in this loop yet. So we have to remember to increment I. And because I'm in C++, I can say I++, which is really cool. All right. Again, don't forget I++ increments I by 1 after the line has been executed, which works perfectly okay. So I can then run this piece, and as you can see, 1 to 10 is displayed. It works perfectly well. All right. So let's say the problem changes to displaying even numbers between 1 and 100 using a while loop. Let's look at that. Even numbers between 1 and 100. So I probably want to start at 2 because that's the first even number. Between 1 and 100, so I'll probably go to 100, all right? But instead of I++, I want to be stepping by 2, so I'll probably just stay here and say I plus equals 2, all right? So I is going to be 2 at first, 2 will be displayed, and plus 2 will happen. It's going to loop, then 4 gets displayed, plus 2 is going to happen, it's going to loop, 6 gets displayed, works perfectly well, all right? So I'm going to run this one also. And as you can see, that's all of your even numbers between 1 and 100. All right, works perfectly fine. So there goes your while loop. You can play around with your while loop and try to solve all the problems that we've solved before using the while loop. So that's the while loop over there. On the slide, I have other examples. Please engage, type them in, test them out, and see how they work. Summing 1 to 10. If I want to sum 1 to 10 and I want all these numbers to look 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, there is a logic that I can use to do it. Please study it. It's also very straightforward. Test it and see what's happening. Num plus plus, again, it means num plus 1. And we are using it right instead of using a right line so that the next right can be on the same line. And if you run this, you're going to get this. So if n is 17, it's going to show you the sum is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 up to plus 17 equals 153. So please run that to your PC and check it out. And let's complicate. Okay, yeah. So check it out. I want you to also think about another way to solve this problem using a for loop, which is the next thing I'm going to show you. All right. A less complicated program about for loops. So now, first, let me show you diagrams that describe these loops. Give it a second. Okay, so the while loop diagram, again, it just shows you that you check a condition first before you execute the body of the loop. That's it. And you know loops now, so it's not strange to you. And the do while loop, again, it looks like this. You have a loop first, and then you have the condition later. Again, in algorithms, we've gone through this. However, in C#, this is the syntax. It says do, has a code fragment here, and it has a while condition later. So let's quickly see how the do while loop would have displayed 1 to 10. I can have I equals 1, I remove all of this. Okay, let me just change a few things. I'll move this condition down, all right? Then I'll put do here, do. Okay, this is and while that happens. So now let's just check. I equals to 1, that works. Display 1. And then I had 1 to it because I just want to display 1 to 10. And I do while I is less than 10. Okay, less than or equal to 10. So let's see how this works. We run it. So it's the opposite of the, so as you can see, it works perfectly well. All right, it's the opposite of the while loop. So while loop checks a condition before you step into the loop, and the do loop steps into the loop at first, executes the first iteration before then checking the condition if the condition is true. Don't forget, for all of these conditions, you can always use your relational operators like not and things like that. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slide. So that's the whole idea of the do while loop. You're going to get many practice problems and tutorial to follow this so that you can practice. For loops are the most popular ones. So a for loop has these sections. It has A, which we call it the initialization block. It has B, which we call the condition block. And it has the D, which is the body of the loop. Then the C, which is the incrementation, the command that updates the loop. All right, and here's an example of 1 to 10. Int I equals 0, I is less than that. And you've seen many examples in the last 1 week, but let me just show you another simple loop that displays 1 to 10 as a for loop. So what you do is you say for, use a variable int I, just end that command. You say I is less than or equal to whatever number you're going to, 10. Then you specify how I is going to be incremented. I plus plus, meaning that I plus equals 1. I want you to note that I just want to see why I is underlined there. Oh yeah, of course. I forgot to initialize. So I equals 1 at first. I is less than or equal to 10. I plus plus. Done. So in this case, this displays console the right line. So this displays 1 to 10, and that's just it. All right. So I'm going to run that, and you can see 1 to 10 is displayed. Cool. So let's say we want to play around and change things up a little bit, and I want only even numbers between 1 and 10. Then I'm going to have to say I is 2 and it's going to 10. However, instead of I plus plus, I'll say I plus equals 2. And when I run that, I'm going to have even numbers between 1 and 10. All right. So that's your for loop. There are other things you can do with for loop that I'm going to discuss with you guys much later. For now, the job is simple. I'm just going to change this as the final thing before we end this video to the sum of first 10 numbers. So let's say I equals 1 to 10, I plus plus. We want to check the sum of those first 10 numbers. Since I know I'm dealing with integers, so I can make the sum to be an integer. And again, initialization is important. I have to change the sum to 0 first. Then in the loop, I can now say sum plus equals I, whatever I is. Then when the loop is done, that's when I want to display what sum is. So I'm going to remove this line from the block and put it outside. And if I run this program, I should get the sum of the first 10 numbers, which is 55. So if you add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 10 together, you're going to get 55. So I'm going to cut the video short now, and I'll see you in the next video.